Okay, well, welcome to Crosschecks. This is kind of a fun experiment for me. I wanted to see from the UX and design community who would be interested in this topic. And I think it's really interesting because a lot of people get into product management from user experience, but it's not always an intentional decision. So I wanted to talk a little bit about what product management is, how I found myself in it, what you can expect from it, and why I think it's cool. But maybe you leave here and you say, this isn't for me at all, and that's fine too. It's going to be more of a sort of introduction to what product management is. It's a discipline and not so much around best practices once you're sort of a acting product manager. So welcome. It's been a while since I've gone to an IxDA event. I go probably 2 or 3 a year, just kind of randomly, and usually when we're ramping up to a startup weekend. But who here feels like they have a good grasp on product management already? Cool. Yeah, I feel like even people that are in product management are kind of like, I don't really know what I'm doing, but you get better with it. So I'm glad I can be sort of an icebreaker for you guys. My name is Jay, Jay Clouse. I'm a product manager here at Crosschecks, and I'm just kind of generally involved in the community here. I went to Ohio State. I'm a Buckeye. I studied journalism before eventually switching into marketing in the business college. And I mention that because I actually think journalism is a huge reason why I've been sort of well suited for product management, and I'll get into that a little bit later. I also am an organizer and facilitator for Startup Weekend. Startup Weekend is a global organization. It's a 54-hour event where we bring people in over the course of a weekend. They come, they have the opportunity to pitch startup ideas that they have. They form teams around those ideas, and over the course of the weekend, they build a prototype, present that prototype and business to a set of judges. Mackenzie's been a judge for us before. And it's really an educational experience for people to learn about entrepreneurship. We bring in engineers, designers, any other background, marketing, law, teaching. It's pretty great. And I've been doing that for about 4 years now. So thank Startup Weekend for the food. They sponsored tonight. Our next event is in May, and it's going to be at the Idea Foundry, which is great because they just finished the second floor, and it's actually going to be a themed event around Maker. So we'll have things there for you guys to make physical prototypes, and it'll be pretty dope. One last plug for organizations I'm involved in. I'm on the Create Columbus Commission, and the Create Columbus Commission exists to empower young professionals to engage with their city. We have a grants program every year that Andy is a big part of, led last year, and we recognize outstanding young professionals. So if you know someone in the community that's representing really great values and doing great things as a young professional, we would love for you to let us know about them, because quarterly we recognize really strong young professionals in the city and have them recognized at City Council. So if you Google Create Columbus Commission, you'll find it, but the website is Create Columbus with a period between the B and the US. It's very clever. So that is the final plug. Before I came to Crosschecks, I was one of the co-founders of a ticketing platform called Tixers. It was a lot like StubHub on one end. You could come and buy tickets from the secondary market. On the back end, we basically bought tickets up front from you in terms of site credit, so it's kind of like a site gift card, so you could quickly liquidate your tickets and buy new ones. We sold that company to a company in Florida in 2015, worked there for about a year. That was my unofficial introduction to product management, just because it was by necessity. We never had more than 4 people on our team, so anything that needed to get done that was not legal and accounting was sort of on my plate to do, and even design. So it's nice to be in an organization now at Crosschecks where no one lets me touch Photoshop anymore. So here I am. I've been at Crosschecks for 9 months. I'm a product manager. If you don't know what we do, our mission is to build an identity layer for healthcare so people can connect and share information about their health. It's on the wall back there. What that means is we have products for hospitals, independent physicians, and even patients to better own their healthcare identity and share that with their providers. So Crosschecks has been around since about 2013 on that mission, and it's cool to be a part of that. So for me, as a product manager, I oversee 3 products: our hospital product, our product for independent physicians, and our patient mobile app. So that's what I do here. That's why I feel like I am suited to speak to you tonight. I hope you agree. And so what I want to talk about is, what is it like being a product manager? And the way that I would best describe that is this wonderful GIF, which will just loop and loop and loop. This is from Spider-Man 2, but I'd actually like to take some guesses as to why you think I'm showing this GIF as a product management tool, if anyone's brave enough. Yeah.
You protect the team from scope creep?
That's actually true. I should. Sometimes I'm the one who enacts the scope creep, as John can tell you. But yeah, I should protect the team from that. Anybody else want to give some ideas? Yeah.
You're hurtling forward, being pulled in different directions.
True. Yes, that is almost exactly what I would say. I like this because he's holding out like this, and I literally feel sometimes that I am holding on to, like trying to hold together the needs of a lot of people, right? Like in one hand, you've got the business needs. In one hand, you've got your engineering team that you want to represent. Behind me, the train is sort of like the release that's coming, and I'm just trying to like protect it and keep everyone together, and I'm not trying to stop it. I'm actually wanting it to go faster, but I think this is actually a really good representation of what I feel like on a day-to-day basis. So I think of a product manager a little bit as the glue between a cross-functional team bringing a product to market. There's a lot of different people that you represent and work with on your team as a product manager, and I think one of the best definitions of these different roles and responsibilities I've read is in Marty Kagan's book, Inspired: How to Create Products People Love. So I'm just going to go with his definitions for the most part here in this next piece to explain what some of these different terms are, because you hear product manager, you hear project manager, you hear product owner, you hear all kinds of stuff. So let's lay a baseline for what I'm getting into tonight, and then I'll get into it a little bit more. So we'll start with the product manager. There are a couple of key responsibilities as Marty defines it. Assessing product opportunities and defining the product to be built are the main components. Once an opportunity is discovered and the company has decided to be well suited to pursue that opportunity, it's the product manager's job to define how that product is built and what it looks like. That can include the features and functionality, the user experience in conjunction with the user experience person, as well as release criteria. So I'll get a little more granular in that later, since that's the focus of the talk. But other roles, the user experience designer, as you guys are well aware of, I'm sure, developing an understanding of the target user, creating the tasks, navigation, and flow that is both usable and valuable to the user, as Kagan puts it. So the heart of this is software should be usable, meaning users can figure out how to use it, and valuable, meaning users actually want to use it for their job. So that's a big important piece. Project manager is a little bit different. Main responsibility here, as Kagan defines it, is the project scheduling and tracking. So actually going down ticket by ticket with the engineering team, mapping out the roadmap, the key things that need to be completed, and on what time frame. This is what is also referred to most frequently as a product owner, or if you're into agile, a scrum master. And depending on the organizational size and culture, this may all fall under the product manager a lot of the time. Engineers, they do the hard work, right? Right, John? Yes. They say, okay, I hear your responsibilities, and I can make that actually exist, which is great. They also are responsible for a lot of testing and validation on the product. So without the engineers, the train doesn't go. Product marketing. I know some of the individuals here are in product marketing as well. Key responsibilities here: telling the world about the product, managing the external launch of the product, providing tools for the sales team to go sell the product. Sometimes, and I would not recommend this, but in some organizations, this is also assumed by the product manager. Really depends on the size of the company. Like if you're talking 2014 when I was with Tixers and we had 4 people, yeah, I did this too. But when you have a large organization, it really doesn't make sense for this role to be owned by the product manager. Some ratios that Marty Kagan thinks are good for a software team: 1 product manager per every 5 to 10 engineers. I think that's pretty good too in my experience. 10 is getting a little heavy and a little difficult, but also 1 UX to every 1 to 2 product managers. I read a pretty good piece on First Round Capital's blog by the lead designer at Airbnb, and he actually recommends sort of a 1-to-1-to-1 ratio with design, which I think is also great. I think the more user experience designers you have in the room, the better. But he says 1-to-2 potentially. So in my experience, product managers and user experience have lived on the product team. That's the way it operates here at Crosschecks. We have sort of a product division that is the product managers, our head of product, and the user experience designers. We have acted, the product managers, also as project managers or product owners, as it's defined sometimes. We do not directly manage people, and I think that's important, and I'll talk to that a little bit later, why that is. But really what it gets down to is, as a product manager, you want to work cross-functionally with your team, and it's healthier and more productive and better for the users, frankly, if you have some sort of healthy discourse with other functions of your team, and you can't be a boss, you have to be a leader. And you have to sort of almost negotiate and explain clearly why the things that you are laying out in the requirements are necessary for the user, and you need the rest of the team, the engineers, the UX, to feel like they are open to give honest feedback and criticism on that. And like I was just saying, product engineering, marketing, and sales are separate divisions that work sort of at this unilaterally with the product manager. So I'll talk a little bit now about the process that product managers go through and sort of people who just are involved with product generally. You hear a lot about this sort of build, measure, learn cycle, right? This is kind of the traditional model. I don't disagree with this, but the way that it is always stated, build, measure, learn, I think does not put enough emphasis on the front end of learning before you build and measure. So I would almost just like turn this, what's a corner of a triangle, 60 degrees? 60 degrees and say learn, build, measure, repeat. And so at Crosschecks here, and in my experience, this is our process. First we do problem discovery. Going out to the market, understanding what problems exist in your target market, and talking to a lot of users to make sure that is an actual problem. That comes from a lot of customer interviews, going out, talking to people, leading non-biased interviews so that they give you honest responses. You can kind of connect the dots between their responses in that way. Once you've found that discovery, user validation, and I should have user validation of your solution. If you have found what you believe to be a problem and you think you have found a solution, you should do some form of user validation that the solution is wanted and something that is valuable to those users. And asking them like, hey, I have this idea, XYZ, would you buy this? And them saying yes is not leading a very good and unbiased survey, and those results are not really valid, frankly, as I'm sure Mackenzie can tell you. Surveying is a really valuable skill, and doing validation right is incredibly valuable and unfortunately pretty rare, I found. So after some validation, that's where the product manager really comes in and starts doing one of the main focuses of his or her job, which is writing a product requirements document, basically laying out what it is that is required for this product to do and how this solution should function, like I was saying earlier, kind of defining those features and functionalities to actually work. And then that comes with a conversation with the rest of your team, with the engineers, with UX, to say, here is the problem, here is my proposed solution, here is what I'm laying out as requirements to meet the user's needs. Let's have kind of a talk. And what comes through that process is A, really good feedback from other people who are not as close to the problem and can kind of look at it with fresh eyes. But also you'll find that, especially the engineers in the room, are really good at finding holes in logic and in functionality and figuring out, okay, what's the best way to go about this? What are some of the pitfalls if we go about it a certain way? And how do we best approach this? The designers will have a lot of questions around, okay, let me make sure I understand the user, their needs, how this should look and feel, so that the next part of the phase, they can begin doing some of the wireframing and mock-ups. And I put these as sort of the same step, but two components, meaning there should still be a lot of conversation around the wireframing component, because Once the UX feels that they know how this should work, look, and feel for the user, they need to get some feedback from the engineers to say, that won't necessarily work because of these components, or here's another way that I would recommend it so that we don't have to take on an extra 2 weeks of dev time to do it the way it's mocked up here. And then building an actual full-fledged mock-up to look like the software, so you can hand off that set of work to the front-end engineers, and they can build a kick-ass product. After everyone in the room sort of agrees on the solution and where it's going, we form a technical design document between usually a front-end and back-end engineer. It's sort of a contract between the two of them to say, this is what I'm expecting from your side, and this is what I'm planning for on my side. Usually the front-end saying, I need these endpoints, and I expect them to be implemented this way because here are how the components are going to work. And writing that down is just so important because even if you have a great meeting and a great conversation about how you're going to implement this, if you don't write it down during that meeting, you may misremember it, and you can go build two separately disconnected components based on two different assumptions and lose days, weeks of dev time if you don't have something to refer back to as sort of a contract. So once that technical design document is completed and approved, now you get to the fun part. My favorite part is building it, hand it off to the engineering team who take it and run with it based on that design document, build it to the specs, and you'll get feedback all along the way. There's a lot of conversation between the product manager and the engineering team during this build phase because as in-depth as you go in the product requirements discussion or mock-ups or technical design document, inevitably there will be things that come up while building that you say, well, I didn't think about this edge case or this circumstance or this actually wasn't implemented the way I thought. How should we approach this? And so there's a lot of rapid decision making as a product manager. You're given a little bit of information and asked, what direction should we go with this? And sometimes that can go to one of the lead engineers in the product. Maybe that comes to you, but you need to make that decision quickly, and you need to make that decision with good judgment so you can move forward and doesn't sort of impair future development either. After that's built and been sort of tested by the engineers who are building it, we get into test mode. We take that to a team that we call quality discovery, and they go and really bang on it as a user. From all use cases, we have a set of regression tests that we run to say, right now, all of these components work in production. Production meaning out in the world, the product that is actually touching people's hands. These functions all work. Does it still work after we built this new stuff? And it's super, super important, especially at a level of scale, because if you have hundreds, thousands, millions of people touching your product and you don't do proper testing and some component is tweaked, God forbid it's like the login screen, you will instantly know about it once it goes into production. And it is not fun, and it can be expensive. It can be costly in terms of brand equity with people. It's very important to test things thoroughly, and anything you can do in terms of automation in your code base to test that is even more ideal. It's sort of a dream state in a lot of places, but automation is very nice for testing. Finally, everything passes testing. You go through multiple environments usually in testing. We have a development environment, which is the sloppiest of the environments, but once it feels good there, you move it into QA, which is, I believe, quality assurance. I never really asked what QA stands for, but it's the second environment to test things in. If things look good there, you move it into stage. All of these are just test zones. It's not touching real users. Nobody actually sees it outside of your company. Once it goes into stage most looks like production. And if it works in stage, in theory, it should work in production. When that's not the case, you find out immediately and you have a bad day at work. But most of the time, it's a good test. So once that's all tested and given the go-ahead by quality discovery or whoever is doing your testing, you can move to release that out to the public. And so like I was saying on the previous process slide, I look at this as the first two steps are sort of the learn phases. You're doing problem discovery and user validation. Then you have quite a bit of build phases, going all the way from the product requirements document down to the test phase. I'm not sure why I didn't do a better job of stretching that. Followed by your measure phase, which comes basically after you release. Once you release, you should have put on some sort of analytics. You should have some sort of hypothesis around how this will perform, what the impact is to users, how they will use it. And once it's out in production and out in the world, you can start to test those hypotheses. So that goes right back. As soon as you start measuring, you start learning, and then you can start building again, forever. So where do product managers come from? I don't really know. It's not, and there's two reasons. There's not a lot of formal training in terms of software product management. It's kind of a new discipline, and it's not really something that is offered at a college level that I am aware of. I'm sure there are some sort of vocational courses you can go through. I'm sure there are online courses. The world of online education is amazing, but a lot of the people that I know got into it sort of by accident and just discovered that they loved it. A lot of times it's someone that's just been given a shot, somebody that was already in the organization. They're saying, man, we are trying to get this stuff to move out faster. We need to improve our processes. We need someone to own the launch of this product. You seem like you have a good handle on it. Can you go out and do it? And they just kind of live there and run there. And the reason that I mentioned journalism earlier is I think that's actually the reason that I am uniquely qualified to do product management, because what journalism taught me very early was a very strict adherence and respect for deadlines, and also very strong written and verbal communication, which is very important when you're communicating with lots of different disciplines within your team. So, and so the other problem here is it's a little hard to measure what a successful product manager looks like. Being sort of the go-between between a lot of processes, a product manager can look really good because of his team. He can look really bad because of his team. Metrics on how to measure that are kind of difficult. You can look at velocity of releases, but that's not necessarily a great thing. You can look at NPS scores, saying we put this product out, we interview our customers, how well it's going. In theory, the product manager should be the one that defines the solution good for the products or for the users. They should rate them well. There's some ways you can do that, but it's a little difficult. So one trend that I'm tracking is recently there's been sort of a question around product management because in the Valley especially, it's a harder skill set to come by right now. The demand is outstripping the supply. So I wouldn't say that this is a strange headline the way to put it, but it's basically just coming down to right now there's a relative lack of product management talent for demand the way that we saw the same sort of trend for software engineers for the last 20 years. So what does that mean for somebody that wants to get into product management? It means higher salaries. So here's some data that the same article pulled out with some pretty eye-popping numbers for those of you who are interested in product management. But average product management salary in 2016 in the U.S., $138,000. It's pretty crazy. Obviously, that's skewed by some of the coasts, I'm sure. But there's something to be gained here in this world. So at the end of the day, PMs can come from lots of different places. It can come from engineers, people who have been in the trenches building and putting out great products, who think they want to get more involved in the process of it, and want to get more involved helping to lead people. They can make great product managers. People in user experience, user interface design, they can make great product managers. They understand the user, they'll fight for the user. They will really help make it look and feel the way the user wants. People in customer service are as close to the user as anybody else. Maybe they feel like they are really a champion. Maybe they feel that they can really step up and communicate well because of their experience in customer service. People in marketing, people who know the market, they are already leading processes, leading teams. People in sales, and even the users themselves. Sometimes you go out and you have a user that's highly engaged and they say, I love your product. Here are things that I recommend to do it better. It seems like kind of a longer path to get into it, a little more wild, but really, you can come from just about anywhere. It's more about personality and skill set to get into it. So, what makes a good product manager in terms of personality and skill sets? Here are some skills that I think really lead to somebody being well positioned to be a product manager. Time management is incredibly important. So if you're the individual who's always late to the party or the show or whatever engagement, product management may not be for you. You got to really run on time. You're expected communication is something that beat into the ground a little bit, but a lot of what you do is in writing, whether it's in a product requirements document, whether it's by email, whether it's in Slack. You are going to be communicating so frequently, and the more you can do to be clear in your initial communications, you're going back and forth, it's really going to help, because that's just another part of time management. The more clear you are, the more quickly you can move. Adding to those skills, being excellent at framing and planning, and that is to say, when you talk to your team and you do planning exercises to say, here is our next sprint being sort of a 1 or 2 week body of work that you and your engineering team are about to take on, you need to be really good at framing why that work is important and what it means for the company, and even framing your expectations. You know, this is our sprint, we need it to be completed by this time because of X, Y, or Z. You have to be really good at communicating that to your team, because like I said earlier, product managers are not bosses. You don't usually lead directly people. You need to lead and not sort of tell. And being able to frame that is going to help your team move more quickly and with a sense of purpose. You need to be analytical and objective in the way you think. And a lot of times, that's sort of hard to do. It's easy to fall into bias, but your job is to take in all the information that you can, whatever's available, which isn't always a lot, and it's almost never complete, but you need to look at that objectively and say, this is what I'm going to take from this information, and here's why, and apply that to your decision making, which falls into the next point. Having good judgment in that decision making. You're almost never going to have complete information, and the slower you act, the worse off you are. So, of course, you want to make informed and wise decisions and not be too quick to act and too impulsive, but there is definitely a balance of moving quickly, even if it's deemed later to be the wrong decision. There's a lot to be lost by indecision. And then a little bit of a business acumen, because a lot of times you are communicating the business needs to your engineering team, or you need to understand how the product actually impacts the company, and that comes down to a little bit of understanding how the business works and operates. There's a lot on the line when you're building products. It could be that your deadline means an entire contract, which could be any amount of money, and you have to understand that. General traits and attitudes for a product manager: you have to be passionate about product. Your own product, certainly, but even other products. A lot of the times I'm just downloading certain mobile apps that are in the space, or I hear are pretty cool, or I'm going to the store and test driving a Tesla just because I love seeing new stuff, and I love trying to sort of reverse engineer how that stuff works. And that's just something that you have to inherently have, because you're going to be living and breathing the product every day, and if you don't care about it, then you're going to get burned out really, really quickly. Customer empathy is something, and a reason why sometimes people in customer service and sales come into product management. You need to really fight on behalf of the user a lot of the time. Because sometimes in those meetings where you're talking about why you should be building something to a certain requirement, you're going to be asked to go about it a different way because maybe it's easier to engineer. But if that easier path makes the product less useful and valuable to the end user, it's not a better way to do it. So you need to really understand that user, put yourself in their shoes and understand what they would want, or your product isn't really gonna cut it. There is a level of intelligence that you need to do, and really that flows into a lot of the skills. It's it's something that you can't really teach. You can't teach intelligence, but if you don't have it, it likely leads to failure in other areas. You need to be pretty relentless and have a strong work ethic, because it's certainly a full-time job, if not more than a full-time job. While the team is building, you're writing new product requirement documents for the upcoming initiatives. Like, your job never stops. There's never a done. Build, measure, learn is shown as a circle for a reason, and you have to be ready to go to work and go to battle every day. And part of the reason I wrote emotional intelligence next is you can't freak out because the job doesn't stop, and you need to be on your game and lead people and move quickly, and there's just no time for a lot of emotional faltering, and you need to be on top of yourself and keep yourself honest when that is happening so you can get it in check and continue to lead and just be a leader. And to that point, confidence is super important too, because to get people to follow you and say, okay, I believe that you understand the user and I think those requirements make sense, you need to have some sort of confidence in leadership ability. So, a couple of suggestions in closing. A couple suggestions in clothing. Check out this from J.Crew. A couple suggestions in closing, and then we'll get to some questions. You need to become organizationally bilingual between business and engineering. And this is something that I hadn't really articulated until recently. But another reason I've been well suited for product management is because since I had led a business before and I understand the motivations from that top level down, I'm able to communicate that well with my engineering team. And because I can kind of understand logic from an engineering perspective, I can understand time constraints and I can lobby on the behalf of my engineering team for timelines and certain things that are plausible and not plausible and rational and not rational. And you have to be kind of that go-between, because a lot of times maybe the business team is speaking English and the engineering team is speaking Spanish, and you got to be the Spanglish. So it's great to be able to be completely fluent in both, but I've gotten really good at speaking Spanglish. You need to become task and timeline oriented if you want to get into this world. Everything comes down to priority. Everything comes down to priority. You have to prioritize certain tasks of your own. You have to be able to manage your own time. You have to manage the time of others. You have to understand how to weave timelines between deliverables. And you have to break that down into tasks that people can take on, whether it's yourself, your engineering team, the marketing team, the sales team. And you need to really respect timelines too. Actually, the best way I can put this is a lot of the times you're going to be past the ball, let's say. And that is just saying, we have this information, we need you to make a decision, or we have gotten here and you need to give us X, Y, or Z so that we can move on, otherwise we're blocked. And a good product manager gets the ball out of their court as quickly as possible. You should get yourself out of the way of being the bottleneck as frequently as possible, because that is one thing you absolutely can control, and you should do that. Get used to notifications. My phone just has a lot of red circles with a lot of white numbers in them all the time. Whether it's emails, whether it's Slack, whether it's anything else, you're going to get a lot of notifications from people who need your help, support, decision making, and you got to get used to it and you got to respond to them, because it's part of getting the ball out of your court. Could be 8 o'clock at night, could be 6 o'clock in the morning, and your customer service is waking up with somebody in a different time zone. You got to help them out. And then back to a point I made earlier, you have to become comfortable and skilled at conducting customer interviews, because you really do need to be that customer advocate. You need to be someone that understands them well, and to understand them well, you need to ask good questions that are unbiased and get valid, good information. There is absolutely no replacement for talking to and listening to your users, and I know you guys as user experience designers appreciate and understand that as well. So really, there is absolutely no replacement for doing that. Get out there, talk to as many people as you can. And finally, here's just a suite of tools that I use that I would recommend if you're interested in product management, or if you just want to be more productive and task-oriented yourself in the job that you already have. I use Evernote for note-taking. It's great because it's beautiful, it's simple, it syncs between your computer and your phone instantly. It's super easy. Obviously, the Google Suite, most people use that already. Gmail, Google Drive, Google Docs, Google Calendar. Trello is what I use for personal task management. I have a board that divides things up into engineering, design, sales. I have a column for today. I mark them with certain colors so I can quickly see what tasks I need to get done and in what order. And I can knock them down, move them to the done column, and I have this giant done column that validates me when I go home at night. Slack for team communication. I think most people are aware of this at this point. It is really second to none. When we were doing Tixters, we were using Google Hangouts and Skype at times, and it was miserable. Just thinking now what I would do in an organization this size without Slack blows my mind. I have no idea how we've come this far. Jira is what we use for our engineering task management. This outlines specific tasks for our engineers with discrete descriptions of what you require to complete the task. It's really good for tracking that through the environments, through the different process of building and testing. Lucid Chart is what we use in the product team for outlining processes and workflows, so we can quickly get feedback on whether that process makes sense and is logical. And then that is something that we use to sort of dovetail into wireframing, which I personally use Balsamiq for. a lot of you guys probably have much more skill than I do and can just pen and paper or use Sketch or something of the sort. But Balsamiq has a lot of pre-made things like phone outlines you can put on there and laptop monitors and login buttons. You can basically wireframe an entire interface in Balsamiq by just dragging and dropping things. InVision is really, really good for working with the sales team to show full mock-ups and demos of a product. You can take, and I'm preaching to the choir here, I know, but you can take full graphics, put them into this interface, annotate certain areas. So if you click a login button, you can move to a screen that shows the login screen, and it really looks like Frankenware. It looks like a product that's really working. And Uber Conference is what I use for conference calls. It's free. It's easy to sign up. You can send people a link. Usually the waiting music is a little more pleasant than anything else I've used. And that is it. So, thank you. Here is my email address if you guys want to get connected. I've been shamelessly plugging my Twitter in the left-hand corner of this deck the entire time. I write from time to time, and I think I'm going to start writing more on product management. So if you want to learn more, you can join my newsletter, which is just at jclouse.com. But I'd be happy to answer any questions if you guys have them. Please clap. Cool. Anybody have questions? I'll come sit down.
I just wanted to ask you, because you're that connector between all the participants, do you ever try to pick up languages, software languages, or anything that, the teams that you're working on have to deal with? Do you ever try to learn that so you can speak to everyone?
I have tried and failed to teach myself to code a lot of times. And it just comes from, there's a really good graph I saw once that was talking about like the valley of sadness of teaching yourself how to code. Because there's a lot of really great softwares to get you like minimally fluent. And then, so you're like feeling really great about how you're doing. And then there's not a lot of software or not a lot of courses that teach you like how to think for yourself and build things. You kind of have to muddle through that until you feel proficient on your own. They start feeling great again. I never got out of that first peak, or at least out of the beginning of the valley. And what I also found for me, if I were to be able to code, I would be able to go and maybe spin up some of my own ideas, and that'd be awesome. But it's not the skill set that I am best at in an organization. And so do you focus time on learning that skill and then decreasing your capacity to do things like this? Or do you focus on what you do well? And for me, it just wasn't worth not focusing on what I do well. So.
And a lot of that comes from you need software engineers that can speak product management too. So you need software engineers that can speak Spanish and also Spanish, because there's a lot of product manager doesn't even know all the stuff I know. Like these are the 4 things that I need this help on. This is why it needs to be this way. So there's a lot of translating of language between team members.
So maybe you guys kind of meet in the middle then.
I think a lot of times, honestly, I think that I can speak engineering pretty well, but it actually does come down to that. The engineers speak product better than I think, and they're just like, yeah, we know what you're saying, and we're not going to demean you for saying the wrong things, which is valuable in its own right, and that at least means that you have the respect of the team. But it really does come down, you need engineers that have that knowledge too. Yes.
Just wondering, in your experience, how much autonomy do you have in making the decisions? And you say that people are coming to you for, to get these questions answered. Do you have the authority to give them the answer, or do you have to go to your boss, or what's your experience?
It depends on the size of the organization, because if it is the four-person organization that I ran before, like, yeah, I have all the autonomy in the world. Here we have a head of product. Some questions I need to escalate to him because I know they have larger impacts and it's a larger decision. It kind of becomes just a gut feel a lot of the time. I feel like I have a lot of autonomy. I'm sure that changes as you become a large organization, but it depends a lot on trust, depends who your boss is, it's very situational. So a lot of the times, I think product managers have a lot of autonomy, but if you know that it has cross-team dependencies or implications, it's probably a larger conversation. The way the organization is here, I have to do that. I think in some organizations, the operational structure is sometimes engineers feel like they have to answer to you, but it's really not the case. So in any case, even if you do have that authority and you're not leading, it's just like any other role in any other organization. It's not going to give the best results. But a lot of what I've read and learned on product management is it's very important that you do not have that total absolute authority over how things are built.
You talk a lot about like down into your team, but if you like turn around 180 degrees and go to the business, what's your relationship there like, or what's your responsibility to the business look like?
That's where a lot of the timelines come in, because it's not healthy or wise for business to dictate the timelines usually, or at least they cannot dictate the timelines and body of work because they don't have all the information made or available to usually make that decision well. So they need to either have a timeline or they need to have a body of work, and you as the product manager need to give them the other half of that equation a lot of the times. And that comes from kind of being that bridge, because if they try to hand down both, like all the shit gets shoveled downhill, and you usually have a gut reaction like that is just not at all possible, and then you tell that to your team and they say that is not at all possible, and it only makes your capacity worse because everyone feels defeated from day one. And I think that's an unfortunate truth for a lot of organizations that tries to happen, just because you think you know something but you really don't. Some things are more complicated just from technical perspectives that you wouldn't imagine. Like some things may be arranged a certain way in an interface, and you would think, oh, well, those things play nicely together, and if we add this on top, it'll work well. But what you don't realize is you have to go about some other implementation so you don't blow up another part of the application. It's hard. So really, you need to be transparent with that part of the organization, with what is either practical on a timeline or what timeline is practical for a deliverable. And you need to stick to that then. You're going to be held beholden to that decision once it's made. And that's probably one of the measures of success you can hold product managers to, is just being good at those timeline and sort of work estimations.
So you mentioned being sort of responsible for business process engineering group, and especially for this level of emphasis on learning at the beginning of a project. What's that team look like for your learning process?
Could you ask that one more time? I'm sorry.
So what does your team look like when you're trying to learn for the business and validate before you start building any products?
Oh, sure. So actually, I'll tell this by kind of explaining a story. When I came to CrossChecks, I actually came in a role that was it was called strategic growth, which was just like a fun little title. But what it amounted to is they wanted me to go out and validate ideas at the market, and it was almost a sales role, it was a business development role. And so what I had was I was basically given an assumption and given a market. They said, we want to get into this market, and we have an assumption about how we may do that. We need you to go talk and figure out if that assumption is correct, and if not, what should we do to enter this market, and bring back that recommendation. So for the first month that I was here, I was in my car visiting 20 physician offices a day, trying to just talk to any physician I could or any office manager that I could. And it was a lot of conversations, and it was a lot of starting. The way I start a lot of conversations with customers is, walk me through your workflow, because I may have an assumption on what their workflow looks like, but it may look different between users. And so for like an office manager at a doctor's practice, they will say, oh, well, patient comes up, signs this clipboard, I call their name, they come up, I validate their driver's license, I put it into this software system. And once I understand the workflow, I can better understand my assumptions around how our solution may fit that workflow and kind of speak to that. But what is most valuable and what is a most valid response is if somebody volunteers a problem they're having, and especially if they're already searching for a solution, then you're like really close to getting them on board. So you need to ask really good questions to discover what it is that they are frustrated with, and hopefully one of the things they mention is what your solution provides. And if you start to see a trend like that between users, then you're in a really good spot. And so a lot of times I'll start with, walk me through your workflow, then I'll talk about, okay, with that workflow, if you could wave a magic wand and take care of 3 aspects or make 3 things better, what would those be? And just see what they come up with. Sometimes I even start, I don't even talk about the workflow, I just say like, what are the top 3 problems in your life? And if work is one of them, that's good. And if it's one of the things that you're hypothesizing, that's even better. But you need to really ask non-leading questions like that, and try to get them to volunteer what their problems are. And maybe they'll have some ideas around what it could look like too, and that could be great information for you. But anytime you kind of plant a seed in their head, you've already kind of sullied the experiment.
Is your TDD a living document?
Yes, absolutely. It should be a living document, but I mean, John can answer this better than I could, but it's good to call out when changes are made and a change log at the bottom or something. Google Docs tracks that automatically, but it should be a living document until whatever that TDD, let's say it's like the first version of something or a very discrete deliverable, once that's finished, if you add to that project or product later, you should not use that same document.
Think back to one of your first slides that walked through more or less the full process of staff responsibilities from discovery and ideation to validation all the way down through testing and release. And we touched on validation a little bit, but not exactly what I was thinking, which is the compilation or the crafting of that survey.
Mm.
And how do you guys do that here at Crosschecks? How did you do that maybe when you were in that first month you were out, hit the road? And is that a responsibility of product management?
Mm-hmm.
Or are you only accountable to it, but you're not actually responsible to execute it? How does that work?
Yeah, it's absolutely responsible for it's a responsibility for the product manager. And the other thing about validation that's interesting is it shouldn't just come up front. Like when you get through the exercise of wireframing and doing mockups, you should do some gut checks with users there also before you start to build. Sometimes timelines are hard and it's really tempting to not get that feedback. But I basically write down a set of assumptions. So the first month I was going out there, I had a set of 5 assumptions that I thought may be a need for customers. And every conversation I went to, I either wanted them to volunteer it or I wanted to ask a question that got them thinking about it so that I could kind of rate what their interest level was on it. And this came down to me making a Google form. And after every visit, I would type in address of the practice, name of the person I talked to, notes on that visit, and then I had a ranking scale, sort of a matrix of the 5 hypotheses on a scale of 1 to 5, how much it seemed valuable to them. And I just go in my car and fill it out on my phone between trips, and then the rest I would put into Salesforce later. But I think that's one way to do it. It really depends. Processes are a pretty fun thing, and everyone kind of likes crafting processes in this world. That was a good way to do it. It wasn't maximally efficient since I was putting stuff back into Salesforce afterwards, but you have to come up with a hypothesis. You have to go and then get them to speak on the topic so you can hopefully glean some information about your hypothesis and how they feel about it and make a rating. I mean, it's going to come down to you kind of making a gut feel. I guess you could ask them specifically 1 through 5, how do you feel about this? But I feel like that's difficult to do tactfully too. That's probably a better question for Mackenzie. She could answer that better. Yeah.
What's like knowledge sharing governance like between product managers? You are fortunate enough or having an opportunity to work in an organization where there are multiple products and multiple product managers who are learning from their teams and learning from their customers. How do you guys share that amongst each other to kind of sharpen the skill across teams?
Frankly, I wish we did it better, but I think what I would do if I had, and it's not to say I don't have the control over this, I should just push harder for it. What we do is we'll meet weekly and talk about things, and that's good. But I wish that we talked more in terms of problems encountered, assumptions made that were proved right or wrong. We don't get into the depths of that frequently enough, and I think we could. And it could just be fairly anecdotally. It could be tracking it throughout the week as an individual and bringing it to that meeting. We do have a Slack channel for the product team that we talk about some of that stuff. But I think because we are tasked with speaking to users and building the product, if we get things wrong, it is most beneficial to speak about that and be honest about that with your team. And it is also very difficult to do because you're basically openly saying, I was wrong, which some people may either internally feel or externally project that you're doing your job poorly. And so sometimes you don't have that transparency like you should. And I think it's really important that you do. Yeah.
And to add on to that, it kind of goes back to the second grade science project, where it really is the science of connecting throughout everything you do. You come up with the hypotheses. We use that word a lot. There's the analyzing, coming back around, being wrong is okay. Those are big things that you just fix your hypotheses and try again. So kind of, the things you learn in seventh grade actually happen.
Or should.
What did you do after that first month, Jay? Would you say you made like a full transition into being a project manager at that point?
A little bit. I mean, what happened was basically, I was feeling like this is starting to feel like a sales role, but I'm so glad that it happened in that way because I think at the time I understood our users as well as anybody else in the company in a very short time of being here. And essentially, because of my background and because we went to the market and we had validated a concept and the company determined they wanted to go after and build that, now we had basically created a role for a product manager to build that. And they said, who better than someone with experience and knows the user?
How much do you work with the marketing or the product marketing people throughout the week?
Mm-hmm.
What's your experience there? Or do you have product marketing designated, or are they just marketing?
We have a marketing division, and really, I think it's more product marketing than anything else, because a lot of our sales is B2B. We have a patient-facing mobile app, but for the longest time, we had B2B sales. And so most of that was product marketing, and I worked very closely with them for a long time. We changed our model a little bit and changed our strategy a little bit. They're a separate division. In my role currently, I'm basically servicing products that already exist that we're maintaining for our current customer base, so it's less recently, but for a long time I worked with them quite a bit because you wanted to send what I found was that I was qualified to help craft the messaging of the product and help hand that off to the marketing team so they could make good materials for the sales team. And that was where my insight came from the most because I understood the user and I understood what types of words and what types of needs would speak to them so that they could make it great, do their wordsmithing, do their design, do their planning and campaigning, and run for the sales team.
A lot of the stuff in your slide is very agile methodology. How would your job change if you were in a waterfall type of organization?
I don't know the waterfall type of organization well enough to answer that, I don't think. Since this all came for me out of experience, it's all come, like I actually learned product management probably from the engineers that I first worked with at Tixers. So like, here's the way that we work, and I adapted to it, and that was agile.
Since you've been here, do you guys have really far downstream of the product thinking that you have validated a hypothesis only to find that you had invalidated it eventually and had to like sunset it or drastically change it?
I wouldn't say it's been that drastic. More so what we found was you can validate a product and a market and people may want it, but if you don't have a strong enough distribution or sales strategy and it doesn't have network effects, it can be really difficult to get that product to take hold at a scale that makes sense. So that doesn't make the product or hypothesis invalid, but it does make it difficult to continue certain strategies with that product. And so we've, like I mentioned, alluded to a little bit earlier, we've changed what our primary focus is right now. And so the product that I had began building is just out there being serviced for current customers. But we're not actively approaching the market because we had to throw bodies at it, and that didn't scale well enough.
What metrics or processes in your organization define
When we stop doing a product? When I stop owning a product? It depends. I think we have a few enough products that need to live and continue to improve that once you're managing it, you're just kind of there until you move on to a different product. And that's less of about metrics or processes and more about focus and resource allocation. Because any product you're going to put out there, especially in a software world, you're going to want to continue to iterate on and improve. And so someone's going to have to be managing that into perpetuity, whether it's you or somebody else. It's not really very practical to think that you're going to put something out there, it sticks, and you just let it go and don't worry about improving it, because there's always going to be bugs. There's always going to be changes in support with browsers or operating systems. There's always going to be things to support and upkeep. So I don't think it's a matter of metrics so much as priorities for the business and resource allocation.
So are you saying that you keep that product because you're still you work for the product owner and you just keep on getting more products as they come, as the new product goes up?
Are you asking that specific because I'm worried about like 3 right now?
Yeah. So how many products are you juggling at?
We're juggling 3, but what we have is a discrete resource allocation, meaning an engineering team, a product guy, a portion of a UX guy, and our team is responsible for upkeeping these 3 products. Now, granted, it all comes down to priority. We only have so many people that can build and improve, so we may be spending the majority of our time and resources on one of those 3 products and letting the other 2 sit until critical bugs arise or some support needs come up. But that just then comes down to a matter of priority for your team. If these are the products you're responsible for and you have metrics or timelines or deliverables to put in for any one of them, you have to prioritize that build, that roadmap effectively. I hope that answers your question.
Along those lines, there's an organizational design question. You guys have in your 3 products that you're overseeing, you have your engineering team and then your half of a UX designer. So organization there, you guys set up kind of in a matrix where a couple of different project managers are sharing resources across 15, 20, 25 engineers, or are you guys set up in little pods where you and your products are in this little, unit,
Mm-hmm.
and you get to make resourcing decisions and resource allocation decisions as a unit, or you have to make resourcing decisions based upon priorities across other products?
This has changed and gone through a few iterations with us, but basically every discipline is its own division, and those divisions are then divided up into a resource allocation at some point in time for an usually undefined period of time. But they say, this is the resource allocation now. Jay, your team has 9 engineers to work with, or this group of 6 engineers and this group of 3 engineers who are going to roll off at this period of time. It's nice when you know what that period of time is, but it's usually a pretty discrete group of people, so that you can have some accountability and responsibility around things. But that's totally fluid and can change pretty rapidly depending on needs and priorities of the business as a whole.
Weeks, months, quarters?
Yeah, it really depends, because you may think it's going to be quarters, but then shit hits the fan and you got to change, or maybe something else is just going really well and you're like, we got to pour gasoline on that fire, and you pull people to help do that. It can change pretty quickly, especially at a company this young or at this size. We have sort of the agility to do that, or maybe the naivete. So yeah, it can change pretty rapidly. There's no promises. Well, anybody can raise that conversation. The product head is no different to the head of engineering than the product manager is to the engineer. The product head can't make that decision. It really comes down to, depending on how your organization is structured, if everyone reports up to the COO, it's going to be his call. If it's up to the CEO, it's usually Sean. He's usually our CEO at this point. But if there is a need, it's usually something that you bring up at a fairly regular meeting across functions and say, this is happening, here's my evidence, I think we should go in this direction. And then it's just a debate and usually a decision by Sean. Always. I mean, that's kind of that was the Spider-Man gif. Yeah, it's really hard. And I give this analogy a lot of times. It's like, you know how when you open up your iPhone and you see your batteries going down really quick and you double click and you see you have like 30 apps running? I feel like becoming a product manager is all about increasing the number of apps you can have running in your brain and not winding down your battery as quickly. And so I'm trying to like constantly increase that capacity without losing my mind, but I drink a lot. Do I meditate? I've begun meditating. I've tried and failed before, and now I think I'm getting a better hang of it. What I find to be more effective, at least right now, working out has always been kind of my meditation. The other thing that I do that I find to be super effective when I hold myself to it is something a college professor taught me called morning pages. And that is either, if you're going to do it handwritten, which I don't usually do, it's usually 3 pages, or I usually type in Evernote and I hold myself to 1,000 words. What I find is a lot of times when I feel paralyzed and I'm not moving quickly, it's because I have some inner monologue that I'm not even processing. And so if I just sit down and write, it's out, and I can like process it as it's passing through me, and then it's gone. And then I can focus on things. And usually I kind of, as I'm writing it out, I start to prioritize and break things down, and that's super helpful. But yeah, when I was a kid, I could memorize things and had like endless capacity for reading and paying attention and memorizing things, and I can't. My attention span is so short now, and I don't think that's for the better. But ooh.
So sort of, and this is coming from like a very newcomer's perspective. So kind of earlier on in the talk, you were talking about how, I think it was in one of the slides, you were saying the product owner, like, or the scrum master. In my understanding of agile methodology, those are two incredibly discrete roles, just from the way that I was taught, because in a lot of ways you have your scrum master on your engineering team, but having a scrum master also be a product owner can be sort of conflict of interest, since they're advocating for almost different groups. Has that been your experience? And yeah,
S-
I'm curious about that.
I think the way you're referring to product owner there is how most people would refer to product manager. I think our difference is purely semantics here, and that's kind of what I would get to, honestly, when it comes down to a lot of these methodologies. It's like, okay, this guy wrote a book and it sold 1 million copies and it's a bestseller, and this is how you refer to them. But when it comes down to your organization, like, usually the roles are pretty aligned with what someone writes about, but nominally it changes, whether it's because somebody was incorrect the first time or had a different opinion. But you know, what I've read about most is all 3 of these terms, project manager, product owner, scrum master, are usually kind of lumped into someone that's responsible for tasking and timelines.
Right. The way that I was taught, it was that the scrum master is more in charge of the scrum implementation, whereas the product owner is in charge of making sure that the product is delivering value. So there can be, at different times, conflicts between those 2 roles. And in a lot of ways, the scrum master is sort of the mediator between the engineering team and the product owner, and keeping like sort of both of those paths consistent with the process, so that they can both like sort of bend each other instead of like knocking up against each other.
Totally agree. I think those are 2 discrete roles, no matter what you call them. Whether you call the scrum master a scrum master and the product manager a product owner, either way, I totally see what you're saying. And the product manager, or whatever that role is, has to represent the users. There's also like something legitimate to be said about the size of the organization. Sometimes it makes a lot of sense to have separate product managers and project managers, and sometimes, like in my case here, I just do both. And that's more out of necessity than necessarily opinion or desire. A lot of times, until it's not a necessity, then that's the way it is. Cool. Off the hook. Oh, nope. let's get Grimlaw in here.
How do you start to calculate the timeline for builds? Is it primarily engineering, or do you know enough that you can do it faster? Like, where does that play in?
You need to have a pretty open and transparent conversation with engineering, and this is another reason why that relationship has to be super healthy, because I don't know everything John knows, and John has a much better expectation and understanding of what that timeline's going to be, and he could just lie to me. He could tell me it's going to take 3 weeks when it's going to take 2, and And I wouldn't know. So you need to speak to your engineering team. You need to know who to trust, or you need to know at what level of trust you can have with somebody. And really, the best way, when I feel like I'm at my best, is when I'm getting their buy-in and saying, what is the timeline we can do this on, and getting them to agree to something sort of audacious, because now they're not being told. They feel like they're invested because it was their response. That's like when I feel like my team is operating at its best. But you know, it can be hard because you don't know off the top of your head, and you got to go to someone that knows that answer better, and ultimately you're sort of beholden to it, for better or for worse.
So follow up, when like engineering has to work late every evening for a week straight, is that because the timeline was too aggressive, or like how did that play?
Yeah, that meant that the timeline was too aggressive. And that can mean one of two things. Maybe you misestimated it, and everyone is just like, shit, we did that wrong. It could also be that the timeline and the body of work came from the top, or somebody that didn't have the full information that they should have, and they're still just expecting that it's done by that time. And that's the most unfortunate situation, because everyone feels like they've been slighted, and it's not fair.